If you are a teacher, parent, administrator, student, and/or anyone who loves reconnecting children with nature, and you want to figure out how to cultivate learning gardens and nature-based curriculum, then this is the podcast, the Outdoor Classrooms podcast. My name is Victoria Hackett. I am the founder of Outdoor-Classrooms.com and the Secret Gardens Nature Classes. I love witnessing the magic that happens when children are playfully learning outdoors. Observing the return of wonder and curiosity when children are interacting with nature is pure magic. This is the podcast that is going to help you capture children's interest and give you not only inspiration, but some real life strategies that are going to help you figure out how to use the outdoor space, your outdoor space, as a teaching tool, so you can enlighten the playful learning experience for young children. Welcome to our Outdoor Classrooms community. Unveil the future of education with our new Outdoor Classrooms teacher certification program. Are you ready to revolutionize the educational landscape? We're excited to present a groundbreaking and comprehensive program that empowers educators with the expertise to extend learning beyond the traditional classroom setting. In response to our community's call, the Outdoor Classrooms Teacher Certification Program is now available. Picture yourself teaching in an open-air classroom surrounded by serene beauty of nature, where students gain knowledge through immersive, real-world experiences. This certification program provides you with the essential tools to create dynamic and impactful outdoor learning environments. Whether you're a seasoned teacher or just beginning in your educational journey, this program offers a transformative experience that will elevate your teaching approach. Join the growing movement towards experiential and environmental learning. Enroll today, and together we'll chart a course towards an inspiring educational journey, one lesson at a time, under the open sky. What do you do next? You can visit our website at www.outdoor-classrooms.com, and you can either sign up, learn more, or not too sure, you can sign up for a one-on-one call with me, complimentary, and I can tell you more about the program and see if it's the right fit. Enjoy. Dr. Judson is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University. She gratefully works for unceded traditional indigenous territories. She investigates an imaginative and ecological teaching practices pre-K through post-secondary with an expertise in pedagogy called imaginative education and imaginative ecological education. She also researches the role of imagination in educational leadership with a specific focus on leadership for social and ecological justice. Her latest books are entitled Cultivating Imagination in Leadership, Transforming Schools and Communities, Imagination and the Engaged Learner, Cognitive Tools for the Classroom, Engaging Imagination in Ecological Education, Practical Strategies for Teaching, and a walking curriculum, and also a walking curriculum for early years. Without further ado, Dr. Judson. Hello, Dr. Gillian Judson. I am thrilled that you are here and can't wait to dive in and talk about your journey into ecological education and imagination. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be part of your podcast.
Thanks. So could you start off by sharing a little bit about what led you to develop this content of work? It's amazing.
Well, I began my teaching career in high school, but I came in this life and was raised in a family that really encouraged me to see the wonder in the natural world around me. So I was definitely somebody that came out of university with a geography degree and very interested in the natural world in general. But when I was teaching in an urban high school, just wonderful students. I mean, the school, people say, oh, you work at that school, it's a tough school. But every day, the students just blew me away with their kindness and their courage and their smarts. But I did have a moment that was kind of pivotal for me that led me on this journey. And I had just finished teaching a riveting lesson on the passé composé in French. I was a French teacher, a social studies teacher, a French social studies in French teacher.
Wow.
I had great students. And on this particular day, this student who was an honor roll student who went on to university, did great things. He had, back in the day, mid 90s, had just finished drinking a bottle of water out of one of those disposable bottles. And on his way out of the classroom, as per usual, he was a little slower than the rest. He was going to thank me for my lesson today. And as let's just call him Ryan, as he was leaving, he was flipping this water bottle up. Now, to get out of the classroom, he had to pass me, a giant blue recycling bin, another blue recycling bin, and a very small dented garbage can. And he threw his water bottle into that garbage can.
Oh, wow.
Usually I was used to fishing things out and moving them around. But on this particular day, I said, Ryan, whoa, like, why didn't you bother recycling the bottle? And he was a little surprised to be called out by the teacher, not used to that at all. And he said, with all due respect, Ms. J, what's it got to do with me? And I thought,
Oh.
wow. And, with more conversations with him and other students, I realized that they had a lot of knowledge about climate change and ecological issues, but they had literally no emotional connection to any natural place around them. So I began thinking about this problem of disaffection and the cycle of disaffection that can happen. And what does that eventually mean for activism, for making decisions that are for the flourishing of the more than human world, as we can say, the natural world. So I started my doctoral studies with this question of what is required to educate for ecological understanding, like a sense of being connected to the natural world, caring about that world, and choosing to live differently in that world. And so that was the basis of my doctoral research. And so I did a lot of investigation into that. And what came about was the really central role of imagination in that practice.
Fascinating. I mean, did you kind of go into it thinking imagination would be part of it or not? I mean, it's fascinating that was something that grew out of your research.
Well, imagination in a different way, because when I was doing my doctoral work, I had the real honor of working closely with the now late Dr. Kieran Egan, who devoted his life to examining the role of imagination in human development and how it manifests in young children, preschool, early elementary, all the way up through, post-secondary and adulthood. How do our imaginations help us engage in the world? And what does that look like pedagogically? So I was deep in his work, and then I had my ecological questions. And I noticed that in all of the programs that I was looking at, and those programs looked very different. People were outside, they were doing different things. But if you went into the lesson planning curriculum focus of those practices, they were still the very linear and industrial focused planning that most teachers were learning. And that there's a long history of objectives-based approaches to teaching. It makes a lot of sense. You start with your objectives. You want to teach X. You break X up into 3 components that make sense. You teach those 3 things, and then you give a test or some evaluation to see how well the students have done. What most people don't know is that approach was based on a method for building refrigerators. Again, in a steel plant in maybe your part of the world, in Massachusetts, maybe. And it was about efficiency and how do we logically and efficiently build a refrigerator or any other steel produced good. And someone in education saw it, Ralph Tyler was his name, and he said, this is a great model for efficiently and effectively developing units and lessons. But the last time I checked, human beings are not refrigerators. We come to the world with emotions and imaginations that are always engaged. And so Kieran Egan's work says, how do we teach in ways that acknowledge the emotional core of the human being? So rather than saying, I want to teach X and I'm going to break it into these component parts, he said, what's the story on X? When you seek the story of something, I'm not talking about a fiction, but when you think of the emotional, interesting, wonder-based aspect of something, then you're suddenly tapping into the most significant thing that we have as human beings for learning, and that is when we are emotionally engaged. It was in doing his work and work with his theories that I had a whole different sense of what imagination is. Because I know people listening must think it's just sort of the SpongeBob SquarePants imagination. That is not what I'm talking about at all.
Incredible. So I found you. I don't even know how this book came into my lap, but it's called A Walking Curriculum, Evoking Wonder and Developing a Sense of Place, K through 12. And it's this beautiful thin book. And could you tell us a little bit more about this book and how this book came to be?
I'd love to. That's my little baby.
Yeah, it's
The walking curriculum. And I'm really pleased that many educators love it too. But it's the third book on an approach to teaching called imaginative ecological education. So I mentioned I investigated sort of what's required to educate for ecological understanding in my doctoral work. And at the end of that work, I had these three principles that need to be interwoven. And I was so excited as a brand new minted PhD person to get my book published. And I figure that nobody on the planet has ever read that book because it's theoretical and nobody wants to read it. I don't even know if you can get it. I think the only person who has a copy is my mom. Right? So nobody cares. So then I thought, that's not why I want to do the work. I want to work with educators. And I was really fortunate to work on an outdoor and environmental school project here in BC. It was all outdoors and I was very involved in the planning of that. And I wrote a book about that experience where I was implementing these practices. And I was very excited. It got published by UBC Press and it was being picked up by educators, but it was being picked up by educators that were already interested in outdoor learning. So they picked it up. They got a lot of really hands-on ideas for how to apply imagination, why imagination matters. And I will go into what imagination means in a sec. How do we do it? So that was really cool. But I was still not addressing the people that I wanted to connect with. The French teacher, the math teacher, the grade 3 teacher that really cares about the natural world, climate crises, but doesn't even really know where to start. They didn't do a geography degree. They don't define themselves as outdoor educators. How do we move learning outdoors with imagination and inquiry in a way that any educator can do it and might want to do it? And so it's about using the schoolyard initially as the place-based source of the learning. So a walking curriculum is this third book. And I self-published it through Amazon initially. It's now being published in other places, which is super exciting because I wanted to see if it could get in the hands of educators and it allowed more people to become more comfortable moving outside. And all three of the books are about how do we emotionally and imaginatively connect people, children with the natural world so that they end up not being disaffected, but they have effective relationships, they have connections with the natural world around them.
incredible. And I love the fact that you speak about wanting to get this particular book in the hands of educators that do not see themselves as nature-based or ecological or all of those things, and that and even going through it, you offer such simple exercises in terms of, and very creative and very innovative. And then with so many teachers that don't have a lot of time, this is just the perfect remedy to answer all of those questions. So thank you for that incredible body of work. I want to shift a little bit and have you kind of dive a little bit deeper into the role of imagination, ecological education. That's a mouthful. Can you tell us a little bit more
Sure.
about that and where that comes from and how that works?
Yeah, so I friendly call it IEE, Imaginative Ecological Education. And it's not about teaching ecology. It's about how do we take an imaginative approach, an ecological, a connected approach to teaching anything. So the principles that came out of the research from the doctoral work are there's three principles. I don't want to make it sound super neat because it's much messier than this, but there's sort of three dimensions that seem to be very important for creating learning opportunities for people that then affect them in ways that can lead them to care more about the natural world. One of those things is being place-based, being outdoors, being connected to some natural place. You don't need wilderness in your backyard. We can do these in urban environments, suburban environments, but we need connection with natural things in the world around us. So that's one principle. The second is something called activeness. We do need to bring an awareness back to the body. Interestingly, the idea of activeness might lead people to think of kinesthetic learning, moving, jumping, running. Actually, activeness could be more successfully achieved through pause and through breath work and through meditation. How do we remind ourselves? How do we remember the body and remember that the body is where we interact with this more than human world? So drawing attention to the body, drawing attention to the body's tools for learning is super important. And the third principle, which is, I would argue, like connected to the others, but also separate, is feeling. We don't talk enough about feeling in education. When we do talk about feeling, we tend to talk about social emotional learning. We have to make sure that we can moderate our emotions, we can regulate emotions. We have a lot of mental health crises, and I am not downplaying that at all. What I'm speaking about more is how do we get kids to feel something about fractions? How do we get them really jazzed up about osmosis or about different mosses? How do we tap into human emotion when it comes to learning the content of the curriculum, whether it's calculus or whether it's how to write a paragraph? Whatever it is. So this is where the theories of emotional and imaginative engagement of Dr. Kieran Egan come in. He said there's different ways our imaginations work in the world around us as we all through life. A lot of those come with language. So one of the most powerful tools we have that engages the human emotion and imagination is the story form. How do we shape things so that people are emotionally connected? There's visual images, there's mysteries, there's patterns, there's rhythms, there's heroic qualities, there's humanizing meaning. There's all these different tools that he noticed and observed and then tied to practices that allow us to use them in our planning and our teaching. So you foreground the emotional and imaginative engagement of the learner. So then, what is imaginative ecological education? It's an approach to teaching anything where we're foregrounding those emotional dimensions of the learner, not to make it fun, but to make the knowledge meaningful and memorable. The only way we remember things is when they've affected us. Yeah. Things go through the amygdala when our emotions are connected. So how do we teach those serious aspects of the curriculum? I use this practice in my post-secondary teaching. I teach graduate school. How am I shaping my teaching on leadership theories and all these things in ways that make information meaningful and memorable to my students? So that's the approach. Doing it in an ecological way, we also want to connect to, learn from, engage with the natural world, and we need to bring attention to the body's engagement with the learning. So those three things are described in those books. But in a walking curriculum, I wanted to give people activities, boom, 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 that you can do that would use a tool of imagination, that would tap into imagination in other ways through inquiry and get people comfortable with it. The theory is very thin in that book. But my hope is people will say, why are we using images? Why are we telling jokes? What are we doing? And that they'll go look at the other ideas. So that's kind of the practice of imaginative ecological education.
It's absolutely brilliant. It's brilliant. It's and that you can do it with any age group is a beautiful. You talk about cognitive tools. Is that within those three, or is that something that's separate? Can you talk a little bit about cognitive tools?
I sure can. Now, I don't know if any listeners are theory buffs, but if they know the work of Lev Vygotsky and the thinking and theories of Lev Vygotsky, he talked about psychological tools that grow the imagination. And Kieran Egan referred to them as cognitive tools. Now, there's a problem right off the bat with this because most people think cognition and emotion are separate, right? But Kieran didn't think that. So when Kieran referred to cognitive tool, he's talking about a tool that connects knowledge with our emotions and our imaginations. So a story, when you learn something through a story, as our Indigenous colleagues have known since time immemorial, the knowledge becomes more meaningful and memorable. If you use a vivid mental image, another cognitive tool, then you're connecting knowledge with something that evokes imagination and emotion, and therefore it makes it more meaningful and memorable. So that's what these cognitive tools are all about. They would be the practical tools we talk about when I talk about using imagination in teaching. This might be a good segue to the metaphor of imagination because I talk about cultivating. And you want to picture these tools. These are like gardening tools, and we use them. We use our stories and our rhythms and our patterns and our jokes and our humor and our heroic qualities and all these different sets, which you can learn more about. And when you use them, you're cultivating imagination, the soil of imagination.
I love that image. I really do. It's very, very powerful. So, can you give some examples in terms of how you might use some of these tools in your own teaching, even the adults that you're teaching?
I begin my teaching practice from maybe a different place. I'm not discarding the value of objectives. Some people hear me say objectives-based teaching isn't maybe the best way to do it. And they say, that Judson person, she's disregarding objectives. I am not disregarding objectives. We have objectives. We're professionals. We have things we need to teach our students. But I know that objectives are not what's going to get my students to lean into my lessons, lean into my lectures, lean into the activities I provide them. So when I begin my teaching, I always look for like, what is an emotional dimension of the topic? So here's an example. I teach assessment practices for third-year students here at SFU. And I think to myself, what is emotionally engaging about classroom assessment? Now, knowing a lot about it and having had I had 7 years teaching in an urban high school. Lovely, fabulous. But I still do assessment all the time now. Well, there's so many things that are about it that are fascinating. But I know from learning about your imagination that human beings love drama. They really do. We can say, oh, I'm not into drama. But the truth is, humans love drama. Human beings notice tensions in the world around them. And if you read a newspaper article, you'll probably notice fair, unfair, powerful, powerless, victim, culprit, something like that. I don't know. These oppositions. So I started thinking about my teaching, and I wanted to shape my teaching of assessment around concealed and revealed, because such a small aspect of what we assess students on is what they reveal to us. And we have to make decisions knowing that much more is concealed and we can't access it. So with this division and this feeling, this tension of conceal and reveal, we explore ways to enable learning, to enable students to demonstrate more learning. And it's not like I made up a story. It's not like I put on a hat and put on a dance. But when we talk about assessment, I talk about a practice of exploring the hidden and the revealed dimensions of learning, framing it. And there's all kinds of other things I do. I mean, if you're best, we do digital collage, we do all kinds of things. But that was one little example. So for elementary, primary specifically, I encourage all educators to shape whatever you're teaching around a dramatic tension, because it's a great way to frame it. There's a reason why students love the great myth stories, the fairy tales. There's always these dramatic tensions in them. So we need to use the same tensions when we're teaching kids how to write a paragraph.
I just got goosebumps. I want to be a student in your class. I'm going to get all your books now.
You're
fascinating because it is. You're right. You start with this walking curriculum and it gets you really thinking about all this other depth that you have studied and mastered. It's incredible. So you spent you were saying the last 5 years, you spent a lot of time doing this work with ecological education and imagination. And then you said you spent the last 5 years kind of exploring leadership. Can you tell me a little bit about how that comes into your story?
Yeah. So without making myself feel like a dinosaur, I've about 20 years ago is when I started my doctoral work. So I've been definitely not stopped investigating these imaginative and ecological pedagogies and the role of imagination in teaching and learning. Haven't stopped that. But I was really excited to get a tenure track position in leadership here at Simon Fraser University starting in 2020. And I'd already begun to dig into question of using these conceptions of imagination and the fact that we all have tools that we use to engage in the world around us. In what ways does imagination support leadership? How do we cultivate imagination in leadership? How do leaders use tools to cultivate imagination within themselves and within others in their communities? It became very clear to me that there's core leadership practices that require imagination. And imagination for me is not make believe at all. As long as we believe it is that sort of falsified fantasy world and glitter and balloons and unicorns, we're not going to see at all how it's valuable to be to a superintendent of a school district or a principal or an instructional leader. So I talk and think about imagination as the ability to envision the possible in all things. And it's out of that questioning, the what ifing, the what if something were otherwise state of mind that creativity comes and later innovation. But we can't create or innovate without first envisioning or imagining something to be possible. And this is clearly the part of leadership work. So one of my latest projects, following the publication of a book by we created an edited book. We wanted to see who else was writing and talking about the role of imagination in leadership. And not many, because it's so widely misunderstood. That's one of the reasons I've spent so much time thinking about imagination as soil and how we cultivate it with tools, trying to address some of those other misconceptions of it being separate from reality. I try to ground that work. My colleague, Dr. Megan Doherty, and I edited a book which includes the perspectives, research practices, and stories from leaders who do use imagination explicitly. And then and that's called Cultivating Imagination in Leadership. And then from there, we really wanted to talk to more scholars that specifically employ imagination to do the work of social and ecological justice. So one of the websites that might be in the show notes is the Cultivate Imagination Project, which is asking leaders, and we interviewed 20 leaders on the podcast, and we have blogs from them. It's specifically saying, how do you use imagination to cultivate social and ecological justice in your work? What are the tools you use? How can other leaders do it? And it's been fascinating. So one of my current writing projects is just to go back and analyze all of the amazing things that came out of that series. So cultivateimagination.ca is an example of the leadership work, some of what we're digging into. But we've also done a case study with leaders that studied in an imagination-focused leadership program and are learning from them some of the ways in which imagination is enabling and cultivating and catalyzing their practice now as leaders.
Wow, it's really a mindset shift in terms of it's twofold. It's because you sort of the first thing you might think of when you think of imagination is the unicorns and balloons and all of that. But you're really talking about the depth of imagination. So in terms of tips and tricks and recommendations in terms of what our listeners might take away, something small that you could share with them that they could use this knowledge and content that you have gathered over the years? Any suggestions for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we need to remember is that we were all imaginative. And I often ask folks, like, are you imaginative? Most say no. If you ask children, it's very different. And then I also ask, are you a storyteller? And some say, yeah, I'm good at storytelling. But all human beings are storytellers. Because if I asked you how your day was, you'd tell me a story. Not that you're making up a fiction, but you'd shape it in a way that I knew if you were having a good day or not. So I'd like listeners to think about, accept that maybe imagination is much more broadly conceived, because right now we tend to associate a small fraction of it, that childhood whimsy piece or the work of great artists, for example, with imagination, rather than acknowledging that on a daily basis, we possibilize, we what if, and as a result can adapt to a rapidly changing world. So if they're interested in how do you employ that in the work you're doing? Whether it be, how do I make my messages to people more engaging? How do I become a better storyteller? If you're an educator, how do I shape something I'm teaching that kids don't seem to be very interested in? How do I make that more engaging for myself and for them? Then you might want to check out our blog, which is ImagineEd, and it's www.educationthatinspires.ca. And there's all kinds of resources for how to use specific tools to cultivate imagination in others. There is a leadership page, but if you're an educator, you might want to look at the page called Tips for Imaginative Educators. And each of the tools I talked about has an example of it and more information and all kinds of things. I would always encourage folks then to say, you know, if I am imaginative, as this person claims I am, how can I develop that capacity? I don't think anybody would disagree that in the rapidly changing world we're living in, we need to pivot. We need to be flexible. We need to be able to what if now more than ever before.
And then adding the ecological piece into all of that imagination.
Yeah, I think now this is a bigger question because if you believe that human beings live somehow separately from the more than human world around them, then you might not consider that work possible or important. My own position is different. I see the world as very much connected. I see them as inseparable. And I'm a white settler myself, but I'm learning an immense amount from my Indigenous colleagues who have always known that the human species is one of many species. And so in my own work, I do seek to look for how the natural world around me can contribute to my teaching. That doesn't just say, how can I take this worksheet outside, but how do I learn this topic with and in the natural world as teacher? So that's definitely something that I think we need to move towards, and not because we want a sustainable future. I always think about, I forget who said it. Do we really want like a sustainable marriage? Doesn't sound like much of a marriage if it's sustainable. We want a thriving and flourishing marriage. So don't we want a thriving and flourishing future? So to achieve that, we need to acknowledge, certainly those of us who've come from a Western perspective where we've sort of taken a position of superiority over the more than human world. We need to rethink many of our assumptions about the natural world and our position in it. And I think that's part of the ecological work.
Wow. Just top of my head, in terms of the students that you're working with, are they interested in nature-based teaching and using the ecological, all this content that you are exposing them to? Are they excited about doing that? And what happens when they go into a school and the school's not necessarily embracing that?
So I do teach people that are just in regular programs. I also teach in specialized programs like outdoor education, master's programs, and imaginative leadership programs and those kinds of things. Because some people join my class and they didn't sign up for collaging. Let's just say that. But they do end up enjoying it. I have to admit, they do end up enjoying it. I think that there is a huge initiative in Canada. Truth and reconciliation is one of our major priorities. So acknowledging the truth of how colonially Indigenous people have been treated, and reconciliation, doing the work of reconciliation as an educator means expanding and undoing misconceptions, unlearning dominant and destructive views, and learning from our Indigenous colleagues and peers in community. So this kind of work, this mind-changing work, is necessary and important as part of that. I do think if anything, the students in my class that might not be fully on board end up having to think through some of their assumptions, which I think is valuable for everybody. And I do think as leaders, it's impossible to ignore increasingly ecological questions and questions of social and ecological justice, which are inextricably connected.
Wow. I could talk to you all day long. Is there anything that we may have missed that you want to touch upon with our audience?
Well, I'm going to send all my students to your podcast because I've been poking around on it and it's great. No, I really appreciate the chance to chit chat, and thank you for doing this work, for doing the work of bringing these perspectives to the public, which is important. I know you've got your followers that always listen, and then you've got people that land on it and think an outdoor classroom, like what the heck is that? Yeah. And so thank you for what you're doing.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. It was labor of love, but I got to the point that it's like, we really need to be starting to have these dialogues and these conversations. And your book was on my bookshelf for some reason. I don't even remember ordering it, but I remember actually suggesting, I was doing a teacher training at a school, and and a lot of educators who just were teaching upper school didn't really know what to do or how to do it. So I said, just go outside and take them for a walk around the school and talk about the subject that you're talking about. So you have so many incredible resources, and I thank you for that and your body of work. And I'm excited to dig in deeper myself. And hopefully that will have a ripple effect as well. So again, thank you for your body of work, and we will put all your information in the show notes.
Thanks, Victoria. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. There are 3 ways that you can get involved in our Outdoor Classrooms community. The first thing is you can go to www.outdoor-classrooms.com to find our free nature-based book list library. That's a PDF with lists of books with links to them where they are all sectioned off into the 4 types of gardens. So it's a wonderful, wonderful resource that is free to you. We pulled that out of the shop to offer it for free. Secondly, if you really want to get to know us a little bit more, join one of our workshops. We have live workshops. We have pre-recorded workshops. You can go to our workshop library. You'll learn about our live workshops through our weekly seedling news. And thirdly, if you would like to dig even deeper and join our community, it's called the Circle Community, and it is absolutely amazing. If you are looking for a community of like-minded educators and or parents that are really seeking to create and cultivate outdoor classrooms and nature-based curriculum and really looking to be a part of a movement that is really changing the face of education. Again, it's up to you. Join us in any of those 3 different ways. Talk to you soon. Bye.